I'm Luke. This is Brandon, waving to the camera. Hello, Brandon.
Hey,
So you just got a job in software,
yes, I did.
your first job.
My first job.
And when did you get hired?
So I received an offer back in March and I got hired to start in April.
Okay. And where was it at?
So I recently got hired at JP Morgan Chase and Co.
Okay.
Yeah,
Exciting. I
exciting
mean,
stuff. Yes,
that's a
very
name,
exciting.
the people recognize. That's exciting.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, let's jump into the questions here. Tell me about your background before getting into software.
So my background, it depends how far we want to rewind. So if we
Day
rewind
of
a good
birth.
bit from the date of birth, it all started when I was born. So I actually was in the United States Army. I know some people are familiar with that. So I was in the United States Army. I was a drone operator, a UAS operator, and a paratrooper, airborne. So I did that for about 4.5 years. Then after that, I had always known I wanted a degree. So I came back home to New York City, went to college for civil and environmental engineering, and I worked as a civil and environmental engineer for a little bit. And that was actually how I got introduced to software. And I went into software from that. So that's sort of the buildup of my background. I started in a technical industry with drones, went into one engineering industry that exposed me to coding, and then I just changed from civil engineer to software engineer.
And so you made that switch while you were still in school then?
Well, I was first exposed to coding while I was in school. I had a couple of classes that were actually geared towards them. Computer solutions for engineers, and I was so bad at it. I was like not good at coding at all. I remember telling my professor that coding wasn't for me. I was like, I just can't wrap my head around this. Um, and I was like a really diligent student. I prided myself on being, really absorbing the information, but coding was just one thing that stumped me. So that was early in my college career. Fast forward to my final year of college, I had another class that implemented some VBA in Excel and some Python. So I was like, that's it, I'm going to nail it this time. That's when I began self study. So the summer before I was going to have that class, I just started self studying on apps on my phone, a few little lessons on YouTube, things like that. And then when I got to the class, absolutely crushed it. So all it took was a little, disappointment from the first round to motivate me to be better at the next round. So while working as a civil and environmental engineer, I started trying to implement coding wherever I could. I remember working on some JavaScript fillable forms. I was using Python scripts in some aspects of my work. And I realized that I was spending almost as much time self-studying outside of work that I really was like, I really like this. And then before you know it, I was looking into boot camps.
Okay. And so was and I'm just curious, so you got a job as an engineer, right? A civil engineer or something structural?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it was more in the environmental engineering side.
Environmental. Okay.
So
And
mostly
so
water resources. Yeah.
did you so the switch was prompted partly by like, man, I've been doing this and I really like it. What how did you like your job in environmental engineering?
So this is funny. I liked it. I love environmental engineering. I'm huge into sustainability, environmental science, environmentalism. So I actually know that, within any engineering field, there are many subdisciplines, right? So within environmental engineering, there's a subdiscipline where it's called like water quality modeling. So you can use programming and coding, mostly Python and some other, prepackaged software to model where contaminants travel in water and how they move. So I really gravitated towards that. So that's why I started self-teaching. There weren't really many dedicated courses to that unless I went for a master's. So I started self-teaching because that was where I saw my career. Then one night I go out to dinner with a couple of friends, and I have one friend who did a boot camp maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And we're just talking about, oh, what do we do at work? So I'm explaining to him like, oh, hey, I'm learning like Python, things like that, so I can start programming. And then he's like, sounds like you really like it. You might as well just go all the way and become a software engineer. And then it was just mind blowing. I was like, why didn't I think of that sooner? And then that's it. It's like he opened that can of worms and there's just no going back. So it was interesting that I was like learning to program, but I had no interest in becoming a software engineer. I just wanted to be a really good environmental engineer who used Python to be a good environmental engineer.
Hmm.
There was like that overlap. And then someone like, put that seed in my mind. And I was like, I do really like this coding aspect of it. I could see myself doing this all the time. Mm.
Okay. And then, so are you 100% self-taught then?
No. So I began self-teaching, but it was more like, I had a full-time job and I was implementing it into work. But so then once he put that idea in my head and I started thinking about it, I started looking into boot camps. I initially looked, same thing. I still never really intended on switching from environmental engineering. I was looking at part-time software engineering boot camps. And then I realized, you know what, if I'm going to learn something, I just got to go all the way. So I decided, you know what, let me look at these full-time boot camps. And I decided just to I scheduled it, left my job and just jumped straight into the boot camp. So I
Oh
took a
my
big
God.
risk. This was around well, I made the decision about a year ago. So this was like July of last year where I decided I was going to do it. So I signed up for a boot camp with General Assembly it started at the beginning of September. So I
Okay.
worked all the way up until Labor Day. And right after Labor Day, started the boot camp.
Okay. Wow. That's incredible. Leaving a job like that to go to boot camp. That's so cool.
Yeah, I took a risk. Paid off though.
Yeah. And so when did you finish your boot camp?
So I did a full-time software engineering immersive. I did it in person here in New York City at General Assembly. And that was, since it was full-time in person, 3 month stint. It was about 13 weeks, I would say. So start of September, I graduated on December 2nd, 2022.
Okay. And so then from uh I'm sorry, you said September?
Yes. So it was about September 4th to December 2nd of 2022.
Oh, okay. Oh, so you started in September, finished in
Yes.
December.
Finished in
Okay. And
December.
then job hunting from December to March.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Um, and I always get ahead of myself here, but I think the next question is, what were you doing to job hunt?
Okay. So for the job hunt, before even jumping into the boot camp, I knew that I was leaving a job to pursue this. So even before quitting the job, starting a boot camp, runway. I was already thinking runway. I have a certain amount of runway to make this career switch happen before I have to return to my old career. I had my savings, I had a buffer, I planned that ahead of how I was going to do this career switch, but I certainly didn't want to eat into any of that money unless I had to. So I immediately started thinking of runway, and I was like, I'll give myself, I and I already had this number before I even started the boot camp, regardless of market or anything. I was like, I'm giving myself 3 months to 3 months was my target. That was my goal to land a role. 6 months was like my reasonable target. So 3 months was like the hopeful target. 6 months was like, okay, at 6 months, now I have to start trying to see, where things are headed. Right. So that was my goal. I was willing to go past 6 months in the job search as well, but that was like, my third option. So that being said, that was at the forefront of my mind. So I didn't, in terms of job search. So the reason I prefaced with all that was because my job search started while I was in the boot camp, because I knew I had this short runway that I allotted for myself. So, I started the boot camp. I didn't start right away. I was like, let me get integrated with this, get used to everything, feel things out. And I would say it was a 13-week boot camp, about 6 weeks in. So midway through, now I was really gunning for like optimizing my resume, optimizing my LinkedIn and just like getting all those pieces together. So I wasn't necessarily applying directly yet, but for the job search, I was essentially like doing the building blocks for the job search that I knew I would need. I was like, I can't wait until December 2nd to then start worrying about these things. So essentially, I wouldn't really say it was my active job search, but it was my job preparation started mid boot camp. So I kind of boiled it down to like, what are all the things within my control that I can do for the job search? And I was like, well, I can control how great my LinkedIn makes me look. I can control my engagement on LinkedIn, my networking. I can start reaching out to my friends and family I know who are within the field or may know something. I can start working on the resume, and at least, even if my bootcamp projects aren't done yet and my personal projects, I can start making sure my previous work experience looks great. My army experience looks great. I can start working on, formatting the resume nicely. So that was how it started. So By the time my boot camp was over, I had a lot of these puzzle pieces. Like they had a very strong foundation already. My GitHub like looked nice. It was presentable. I had my link everywhere. I had a nice resume. I had a portfolio. LinkedIn, I already had like 1,000 connections. I had all these things that I started working on before I graduated. And then as for the job search, it kind of started right around the holidays, which was a little bit of a lull. So I actually took off a bit. I took off. I took the holidays just to spend with family. And then as soon as New Year's hit, that's when I hit the ground running and I really started calling friends, seeing if I could get any referrals. I started actually sending out my resume, reaching out to recruiters. Uh, Networking events was a huge part of my plan. I went to one before Christmas. I was going to a lot of in-person and virtual networking events. That allowed me to connect with a lot of recruiters and just make a lot of friends and see what was happening here and there. So my job search, I would say, was really holistic. I knew early on that I would have to excel, or at least try my best to excel in every area if I was to be successful as quickly as I wanted to be. I knew that I couldn't slack in any area. I knew that networking had to be just as important as learning and project building as it was to having a great resume, as it was to networking with like real intention. So it was tiring. I put a lot of hours in each week, but I knew that I had to put equal amount of eggs in each basket if I was gonna spread, cast a wide enough net.
Hmm. I like that. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're like, do I just focus on my training and then just finish my training and then switch to networking? But then how do I keep growing? Like, what are the percentages of my time and energy I put into all these different things that I'm pretty sure I need to be doing? And then you say you made it, everything gets an equal amount of my attention.
Right.
Yeah. Hmm.
One thing that was, I told you that before I was even aware of the market downturn and like, just how tough the market was going to be, I already had a constrained runway allotted for myself. So once I became aware of, these mass layoffs, things like that, that happened while I was in boot camp. I remember coming to boot camp that day. We had an outcomes coach day. On Wednesdays, we had time with our outcomes coach. And I remember she walked in and was like, I know we all see these layoffs this morning, but be hopeful, everyone. So that became a hot topic. And that was really when I woke up and I said, this is about to be very competitive. So I said, the way I thought of it was like, I can't be anything short of like the holistic candidate. I was like, I can't say like, oh, I'm only going to focus on this or that. I got kind of like, it lit a fire under my butt saying like, I have to put attention everywhere if I'm going to do this as quickly as I said I was going to do it.
Hmm. Yeah, I was gonna go back at some point and ask how that you know, as you're going through your boot camp and you see these mass layoffs, how that affected your mental game.
I I did it. I mean, I got worried for like 5 minutes. It's normal to worry, but then I try and take the worries and turn them into motivators. So I was like, that just means I have to work twice as hard, you
Right,
know,
right.
or twice as
Um,
smart, I should say.
and this is going back a little bit, but what was the tech stack of your boot camp?
So my boot camp, the General Assembly Software Engineering Immersive, is like basic MERN stack with some exposure to Python for the back end. There was some Flask and Django as well, but mostly it was MERN stack. So Mongo, Express, React, Node. We did basic front end with JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and that was like the majority of the boot camp. With some exposure to Python.
Okay, and you'd already had some exposure to Python on your own. Thank
Right. So Python was my preferred language. So I was very happy to return to it.
Cool. And okay, so going forward again to where you were talking about the job hunting process that you were in from December to March. Um, so were reaching out to friends and family who, maybe had some sort of connection to this industry, applying online.
Yes, definitely a combination of applying online, some cold applies as well, some referred from a recruiter. Yeah,
Okay.
a whole array of.
Okay. And then you mentioned going to networking events. So of all these activities, how many interviews did you generate?
So like I said, I graduated the boot camp December 2nd. I really picked up the job search in January and I received an offer in March. So my total job search time was roughly like 3.5 months, I would say, of like being active. So in that time, I kept sort of a log. I applied to roughly 85 different companies. This is before, this is counting like cold applies, a couple of referrals, positions I was referred to. There were 85. I had a total of 3 interviews, and I would say maybe 5 phone interviews, 3 actual interviews. One of them was from a referral from a friend who was a software engineer. One was just a random code apply. I caught that window that the position was open for a few hours on a Saturday, and that actually turned into some interviews. And then the third one I would consider is the interview I had for JP Morgan Chase. So I had a total of 3 actual interviews, and they each went all the way up to the technical interview round, which was either, depending on which position, it was either the final round or the second to last round.
Okay. And then how did the JP Morgan interview get generated?
That got generated based off of, it was essentially, I guess you could say, it's a cold apply. It was a sort of an entry level program that they have. The second round, well, the round after my round that I got hired for actually just opened up today. So it's sort of like a mass application where they hire a couple hundred engineers
Hmm.
across the country. So it's specifically targeted at emerging talent, and they're open to career changers and things like that. So I heard about that through word of mouth. I actually can't even remember how I heard of it originally, and yeah, so it was essentially a code apply and a long process. It was a series of like steps uh, for the interview, like a hacker rank challenge, a behavioral interview, and then ultimately the final technical interview was a hackathon, a 12-hour hackathon. So that was what I competed in, well, participated in, I should say. Um, and that was the ultimate deciding factor. So yeah.
Okay. And so somebody told you about the JP Morgan, like, hey, they're doing like a mass apply, and then some people get hired out of that. So you went to their website then to apply.
Right, exactly. Yeah, on their website, just the regular job board, I saw, it opened up the emerging talent software engineering program. And yeah, I just went, applied. I left my resume in. They sent an invite for a hacker rank challenge. After completing the hacker rank challenge, they sent an invite for a behavioral interview. Then they took about a month to go through all of those sort of submissions. And then that's how you would decide if you were going to be invited to the hackathon. So I received an invite to the hackathon, which they gave essentially 3 to 4 weeks of notice. So yeah, so it was just a waiting game. So I received the invitation to that hackathon in February, and I participated in it on March 3rd
Okay.
of this year. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And do you remember the hacker rank challenge? Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, they were, so interestingly enough, JP Morgan for this program was really looking for like more back end tailored, like people who were interested in back end. I mean, there are a variety of roles offered, but for the application process, it was geared toward back end. So that being said, they were constraining it mostly to Java, Python, and C++, which is, that's why it seems pretty intimidating to boot campers who didn't go to a back-end focused boot camp with like, center around OOP language. But that didn't intimidate me. I was like, this is the type of opportunity I want to look for. So that being said, I practiced a lot of Java. I already had some Python under my belt. So yes, there was a HackerRank challenge that was constrained to Java, Python, or C++. Constrained to those languages. And I would say that there were 2 questions. They seem to be randomly generated. Like, I don't think everyone received the same questions. And I would say they were like oh, a difficult, easy question, like easy teetering on medium, and then definitely an easier medium question. Like a medium level question, but not like one of the more entry medium level questions. So I would say that's where the 2 questions floated around.
Okay, interesting. And then the hackathon. So was it like a team sort of thing?
Right. So the hackathon was team based. They basically had a few hundred engineers from across the country because the application pool was for 7 locations. So you were teamed with anyone. You could be, although I applied for a New York location, I could be teamed with someone who applied for a Chicago or a Texas location. And so the teams were randomly generated on a team of 4 to 6 members. I had 4 members on my team. Excuse me, I have a cat visitor. So, yes, I had a 4-person team. They were randomly put together teams. I had never met these individuals in my life. They gave us our teams like a day prior to the hackathon. So we were able to meet, talk. We had no prompt for what the hackathon would be yet. We were just able to meet each other, start talking, get to know each other the day prior, share what our strengths were, who was good at back end, front end, MERN stack, um, you know, Postgres, you name it. So that was where we shared that. And then, yeah, so the teams were randomly generated and we just had to come together, people you never met before, decide who's good at what, and then come up with a game plan from there.
And how long were you like, was it like, okay, go, and then like what, 12 hours later or a couple days
Right.
later? How did that work?
So the very next day after being assigned our team, so we were assigned teams on the evening of March 2nd. On March 3rd, we checked in for the hackathon. It was a 12-hour event, and the first couple of hours were introductory. We had, say, like a mentor who spent the day with us, and the mentor were there to guide you, but also take note of your performance, how you worked as a teammate, your technical skills. So it was like a behavioral technical interview. It was like
Interesting.
an experiential interview is how they described it. So that's what it was. So yeah, it was 12 hours of just like we received the prompt, which it was the prompts were based around social good. So it was like you're going to build an app for some social good, and they were sort of randomly assigned. We received a prompt and a potential mock-up of what the app could look like, and from there it was completely self-governed. A full stack application, completely self-governed, with the end of the day containing a presentation on the final product itself, as well as explaining what role you played, challenges you faced, and so on.
Okay. Very interesting. Yeah, the logistics of that seem, and then how do you go about like getting, the you've done this thing that's an interview. How do you go about getting all of the things that you need out of that experience to then like pick, okay, these are the people I want to hire? Did they hire whole teams or just individuals, do you think?
It was completely mismatched. It could be a single person, it could be an entire team. Right.
Interesting. It's
It,
so strange.
very interesting. But it's funny how you bring that up, Luke, because I got a heads up based on attending a couple of info sessions before the application process that was how it was going to go. It wasn't all a surprise. Details were a surprise, but the general idea of how they went through the process was known to me. And when I learned that, I was like, this is it. I'm doing everything I can to get this, because given like to bring this full circle, like back to how the market was and understanding how difficult it was, I had already done 2 technical interviews. I would say one went pretty poorly, one went excellent, but I still didn't get the role. So it's like I'm looking back at like how difficult those tech interviews were and how competitive it was and how many people are applying to the same roles I am. And I said, here's this opportunity where they're willing to sort of shake it up a little bit. They're willing to hire me based on like how I just perform across the board instead of just my ability to do a whiteboard. And that's
Right.
when I said, that's it. I'm getting this. I said, I have to get this because it's not going to get easier than this. See, so it sounds like it was a very convoluted and like long process, but I was like, technically in this market, it can't get easier for me than this. That
Right.
was like where I shifted my mindset to. I was like, they're gonna look at me as a person. Not a lot of people are gonna look at me as a person. They're gonna look at me as a number and how I perform. They're gonna look at these hard metrics. And I was like, here's a chance to get looked at on my technical skill, but just how I operate with a team. I get to talk with a bunch of people face to face and let them get a feel for who I am. And I was like, this is like carpe diem. I have to seize this one. And so it's funny that you bring that up. Like it's such a difficult process, but because it was so difficult, I felt it was the most attainable.
Hmm. Yeah.
you know?
Well, no, like the difficulty for me is from their end.
Yeah, from their end.
Like,
Actually, this round that just opened up today, they shook up the whole process. It's actually going to be a little bit more technical interview round. So
oh yeah,
I think most people are saying it was probably a logistical thing.
yeah, yeah.
So
I
I
mean,
understand.
that's got to be so hard to, and I mean, this has nothing to do with anything, but just because I'm burning to know, so that you have this person who's like monitoring, right, assigned to each group, but it's all virtual, right? So the people are meeting on Zoom.
Yeah, this was all on Zoom. All
But I mean, you guys aren't on a call for 12 hours, right? You and your team?
were we? Yeah, we were.
You were? Oh my
Yeah, it
God.
was 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. of just pure Zoom action,
Oh my God. So you had to code with your team while you're like
right?
coding, but you have a Zoom open.
It was intense, but I loved it. I mean, before that hackathon, I had actually done two hackathons before that. Well, when I finished my boot camp, me and a couple of my friends from the boot camp, we were like, we essentially were like, we need to do something really difficult to solidify to ourselves that we could survive on our own post boot camp. So we immediately signed up for a hackathon together, like 2 weeks after the boot camp. So I had done one before, and it was like it's a rush. I was like, I like this challenge of being on Zoom with someone for like 24 hours and just struggling through this. So I was kind of excited for it. But yeah, being on Zoom for that many hours just coding in real time with people is like it's something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, that sounds like a long, like I get Zoom fatigue after, a meeting, and man, that's a long meeting. Well, interesting. Very, very interesting. So, but we've heard about like the interview process, what it was like. What do you think you did well throughout the interview process? And maybe most with heavy emphasis on the hackathon.
So I would say that, although this is not the interview process that led to me landing my first role post boot camp, although not the traditional one that we're used to seeing right now, it's not what you expect. Um, the approach in my mind is the same thing, preparation. Like I prepared, when I say I prepared, like with a militant mindset, I mean, so I knew that I was going to like I knew the interview process was in phases. So I knew the very first thing was a resume. So I made sure my resume was in tip top shape. I got as many eyes on it as I could see. I ran it through services like Resume Worded, things like that, getting like these ATS scores, anything that I could get my hands on to have a well-rounded resume. I mean, I even went on LinkedIn and there was like sort of like one of our like career search influencers on there, um, who was running like a sort of like a, hey, tell me your background and I'll choose four people to redo their resume and like put it out here. And I wrote to him and I got selected. He redid my resume. Like I got as many hands on this resume as possible because I said that's the first round. So I threw that in there. Then was the hacker rank. I knew there was going to be a hacker rank. So I grilled these hacker rank easy and medium questions like day in and day out for a few weeks. I knew that they wanted some experience with Java. So I studied Java on Codecademy every single day, did YouTube, all these things, just grinded Java. And I took this HackerRank challenge in Java, even though it wasn't my strongest language, but
Oh,
I
wow.
was determined. That's what I mean. I just went like crazy with it because I was like, it's not going to get easier than this. I have to go for this. So a lot of preparation. Then for the behavioral interview, it was a series of questions. I know that the tell me about yourself question is going to be one of them. I set like a 60-second to 120-second timer on my Google Home. Hey Google, set a timer. I must have done it 50 times and just said it over and over and over again. I was in the shower washing my hair, saying it on a timer. Hey Google, set a timer, saying it. So I did this religious level of preparation. Like I rehearsed that tell me about yourself question so many times that I could do it without batting an eye. And then when it came to the hackathon, I'm such a crazy person. I did a hackathon the week before the hackathon to prepare for the hackathon. I said the only way to prepare for a hackathon is to do a hackathon. So I'm going to do another one. So I signed up with one of my friends who was also doing the hackathon in JP Morgan with me. So we were both crazy. And then two UI designers from our from General Assembly as well. And we did a hackathon the week before. So I would say that whole story, although it was a convoluted and like not traditional application process, all you can do for any application process is just prepare. That's all you can do. You know what they're going to ask you. They're going to ask you about yourself. They're going to ask you what you know about coding, and they're going to ask you to write code. So that's what I did. I just religiously practiced talking about myself and coding and hackathoning.
Hackathon.
Yeah.
That's a new word. Okay. So this is backing up just a little bit, but the application, on the website that said like, hey, this is the tech stack we're looking for, the skills. Um, of the things listed, what percentage would you say you had training with?
Okay. Yeah, let me think back about that a bit. Well, I would say, they valued your basic sort of full stack skills. So I know that, having just like your HTML, your JavaScript, your CSS, and, being able to spin up a backend in some sort of language was valued in general. So I know I had some extended experience with that from my boot camp. And then, but they really did emphasize, hey, have some familiarity with an object-oriented programming language. So in terms of my boot camp, I actually, we had very limited knowledge with Python. However, we had exposure to OOP concepts. So I knew that I had that under my belt. I was like, at least I have some grasp on these concepts. So I have roughly 7, 8 weeks to prepare for this application process. I can spend that time studying Python and Java as much as possible. So I would say that upon finding out about the application process, I would say not that much experience beside Python, but I know they really wanted Java. So I had no Java experience virtually. I had never touched Java before. All I knew was that it was an OOP language and it was strictly typed, and I had never messed with that before. So I immediately just went online and started learning it. So I would say for that application process, I would say 50% of the requirements I had familiarity with. And then the most important other 50% that they wanted, I just immediately began learning it. So I had no experience with it, but I made sure within the 2 months of time that I had as much experience as possible with it.
Also, just because of curiosity, why did you choose to do the HackerRank challenges in Java instead of Python? Because wouldn't you say Python was your stronger of the two?
Right. Python is my stronger of the two, but I know that for the position, they really were emphasizing Java.
Oh, okay.
So I said, so I told myself, I'm going to challenge myself. I mean, I had Python in my back pocket to do it. I knew that I could choose any of the languages. So I knew if I was struggling too hard to complete it in Java, I was just going to go do it in Python. But I said, I'm going to try and do it in Java because they asked for Java. And funny enough, now that I'm in my role, I don't even use Java. It's all
Yeah,
Python.
nice
So that's the
segue.
funny part.
Yeah, nice segue because that's my next question. What are you doing in your new role?
Okay, so what's great about it is, they place so much emphasis on Java. I started learning Java. I certainly did not want to work in Java. No offense to anyone who uses Java. I just didn't want to use Java, you know. Um, so I landed a Python position within the company. So it's all backend and mostly working on a data platform. And pretty much what we're doing is I work essentially in a core team that works on a platform for the traders because it's more of the finance side and JP Morgan. So it's like the traders, they use some Python, they use tools to work with their databases, generate visuals, models, whatever it is they do over there, right? But so I work on the back end, Python, AWS, a lot of cloud, a lot of data. So what I'm working with right now is mostly AWS data platforms and Python, integrating tools and like into sort of the existing configurations and ecosystem that they have.
Hmm. Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. So in terms of tech stack, it's just Python. I use mostly Python, AWS, Linux, and shell scripting. That's like the bulk of what I'm using personally.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. Very interesting stuff. All right. Well, we're at time, and I've run through my questions. Is there anything you feel like we didn't touch on throughout your experience where you're like had aha moments or just a powerful experience, anything like that?
I think we did a good job at tackling like the points through the process. I guess what I really want to emphasize is that, to bring it back home is the market is tough right now. And one thing I realized early on was that if you're going to compete in here, you have to really put your head down, get it done, and try and be the best that you can be in as many categories as possible. It's not enough to just be good. If there's 5 categories you need to be good in, then you have to be good in 5 categories. You can't be good in 3 or 4 of them because there's thousands of other people applying. If they're good at all 5 and you're not, you're gonna get beat out. So I just want to stress, try and be good at everything instead of just one thing. I don't know. That's
There you
what
go.
worked for me. So
Yeah, I was gonna say it's tough to get a job right now in software, but you did it. So there
I
you
did
go.
it.
There you
That
go.
means anyone can do it.
I don't know. You sound like a high performer.
Thanks.
Well, hey, thanks, Brandon. I'm gonna hit stop.
All right, thanks.